taken the exam 3 times. And unfortunately, I've kind of plateaued around like the high 150s range. I've gotten like the same score, 157, 156, 157. And I guess for me, coming into your platform was trying to figure out a way to kind of break through from that plateau, kind of reassess how I've been studying, and coming up with a new plan to hit that goal score come, maybe June or August exam.
Sure. So tell me a little bit about what you've done before.
I reached out to some people that I found on social media that kind of, helped me create a study. They created a study plan for me, but I still did the work on my own, self-studied. And that helped me increase like 3 to 4 points. And then that's how I got the 157 on the first attempt. But then I decided to go with a personalized tutor that didn't really necessarily give me the best advice, unfortunately. And I saw like a score drop. And then from there, that's kind of been my journey until I realized, maybe I need to look at some additional avenues, additional platforms on how to really understand this test, because that's probably where I faltered in how I was studying, because I definitely did spend, probably almost like a year. So I'm thinking more so, okay, am I studying the right way,
Exactly. You want to make sure you're doing the right kind of work. It's working smarter, not harder. It sounds like, ironically, you got better support from random people online than you did from the tutor that you worked with, though.
Right.
So what was the bad advice that you got that wasn't working for you?
I think for me, it had to do with reading comp. Reading comp for me has been my strongest section. And I think when I was working with this tutor, he had very specific like methods that he specifically created for reading comp and for just the entire test overall. So when I was basically learning those new methods that were specific to him, and when I would try to implement them, it was like I was trying to learn something completely new. And for reading comp specifically, I think he gave me the advice of like, taking notes after like every single paragraph or something like that. And when I did attempt number 2, after I finished the first passage, I realized that I blew through almost all my time. And I just abandoned the strategy midway through that section. And I just, did the rest of the section. I think trying to implement his new rules on attempt number 2 was what kind of made me take a step backwards in terms of my studying plan.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. I mean, reading comp in particular as a section is more personal than any other section of the exam. You've been reading your whole life. And so you have your own style, and what works for you may not work for someone else, and vice versa. And so we want to make sure that, especially for reading comp, we have a really adaptive and flexible approach. There are, in contrast, for logic games, there are objectively good ways to approach games and bad ways to approach games in terms of diagramming styles.
Mm-hmm.
So I will sometimes say in logic games, like, listen, the way you're doing it, it's not clean, it's not efficient, it's not going to work, and we'll test it out and prove it to you if you need. But for reading comp, in contrast, people have different ways of reading, and that's okay. So I think that, more than the particular technique they were recommending or obligating you to use, was probably the biggest issue there. I want to help you craft a study plan, though, and zoom out a little bit here. So you said that you went online, some people gave you some guidance on a plan, and that plan generally, it seems like you were pretty happy with it from what I gathered.
Yeah, the study plan that they created for me was pretty standard. To be transparent, I did have trouble sometimes keeping up with it because, like many others applying, I work at a big law firm as a paralegal. So ideally, 9:30 to 5:30 is a thing, but there are times when, it could go to 8, 9, 10:30, 11:30. So I did fall off the wagon a couple of times in terms of doing the schedule, but it was generally a solid schedule that I did see even get me to 160, 161, a few times on some practice tests. So I would say, yeah, that schedule was pretty solid. I was pretty satisfied for the most part.
Okay, good. So it's helping you structure your time outside of work.
Right.
And so you may fall behind sometimes if you have to work overtime, which I know paralegals often have to do. And so let me ask you this. What's your target test date?
So honestly, I was thinking either June or August, but August might be more realistic because I really want to get like a 170. So August probably makes more sense.
Nice. So you've actually got quite a bit of time here. Nice. Fantastic. Okay. So we're speaking now end of February. That's enough time to make pretty much anything happen. And the fact that you already scored high 150s, you've touched into the low 160s at points. definitely suggests the potential for a top score. And what's your goal?
My goal is in the score.
Yeah.
I think 170 is a solid goal score for me.
Yeah. No, totally realistic. So we just got to get you another 10, 15 points. I usually recommend aiming for a little bit of a buffer just in case you have experienced a test day drop, which happens sometimes if there's a tech hiccup or nerves or whatever. So always safer to have more, and who doesn't want more points, right? So
right.
Let's think about over the next several months. We're talking basically beginning of March for at least 3 to 5 months or so, given the foundation you've already established up to this point. So if you were starting from scratch, I'd say it's a little bit tight, but because you've done a lot already, you're in a different situation. So let's hone it on specifically. What are your areas that give you the most trouble at this point?
So I would probably say logic games has always been my weakest section. I've been improving on it over time. So for the most part, I could never complete all 4 games. But as I just kept working on it, I could get 4 games, but I'm just not as consistent with it. So like if I'll take a practice test, worst case scenario on logic games, I could get like a minus, I don't know, maybe let's say like a minus 8, 9, 10. But then best case scenario, I could get like a -5. And I think that at least thinking at it incrementally, just getting to break the 160s, I think I need to be more consistent at hitting all 4 of the logic games. And then for reading comp, on a good day, I can get like a -3, 4. On a bad day, like a 6, 7. And logical reasoning is sometimes up in the air, if I'm being honest. Sometimes I don't, like I do well on some sections, but sometimes I don't necessarily know how I did well, if that makes sense. But on logic reasonings, I'm averaging, let's say like a -7 or so, -6 on a good day, on a bad day, -9.
Okay, so there's still some work to do in all areas.
Right.
And that's okay. That's okay. I mean, you have time. Typically, when someone's scoring below the 160s, that means that there's still some room for improvement across the board. It's rare that someone's getting perfect on LG and terrible on the others at that level, which is actually good because you have room to move forward in each area. You can have some variety in your study plan. And when you say that logic games is an area of particular trouble, to me, that's fantastic news because you may have heard this said elsewhere. It's the most improvable section. It's the most perfectible section for the vast majority of people. And so if we can even just boost your logic game score specifically, you're going to see a big, big increase. And for those who score in the 170s, they're typically getting perfect on games or close to it, maybe -1, and then a few off on each of the other sections because reasoning and reading comp have those perceived ambiguities of language. So I'd say start with logic games, make that a disproportionately high area of focus for now. You can adjust it later, but for now, I'd say focus on games primarily. Maybe you do 50% games and 25 on each of the other sections.
Excellent. So would you say when navigating your platform, I should primarily focus on like the logic game section or like craft my study plan around logic and specifically before? Okay.
Exactly. And so I'm not going to say do nothing but games for the next 2 months. I wouldn't want you to get rusty. I want you to have some variety in what you're working on as well. And there's work to do in the other sections too. But I would say, if nothing else, attend the live logic games classes, attend the live logic game study groups, watch the previous class recordings on different sections of logic games, and aim to really figure out, okay, well, is it ordering? Is it grouping? Is it combinations? Is it hybrids? I mean, see where you have the most trouble in terms of game types and focus there. Does anything stand out to you as a certain type of game that you just know gives you trouble?
That's a good question. I think it might be the multi-layered games. I think the standard sequencing I'm pretty good at, and the standard grouping games. But I think sometimes when you have those multi-layered games, I remember I took the LSAT once, and there was a super multi-layered game where you had to do pairings and ordering within groups. And I think those type of ones can be pretty challenging. I think it was
for sure
November or the December one, but yeah.
I mean, when you're dealing with elements of multiple game types simultaneously, that can be tough because you're juggling a lot of tasks at once and because it may not immediately seem like it relates to something you've done before. Then hindsight on review, of course, you can figure out, hey, you know what? It wasn't really so bad. You just need to make this one huge inference.
Right.
So
right.
that's part of the post-game analysis is so useful. Everything seems easier in hindsight. But by doing this enough, the idea is that it becomes routine, that you will be able to see it on test day. And you can get fast enough that even if you don't always see the key inference up front, if there is one,
Mm-hmm.
you'll see it often enough that you have a time bank where maybe you do 2 games super efficiently. The other 2, you just end up approaching them in less than the optimal way, but that's
Right.
okay. You have the time to deal with it. So pacing becomes really important across the board as you transition to doing timed work closer to test day. For now, since you've got some time, I would focus on accuracy first.
Okay.
Just focus on accuracy, focus on understanding, take as long as you need, review in depth. And then in a few months, you can focus more on timing.
Sounds good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So I'd say logic games for now, but also spend a good amount of time on logical reasoning and reading comp as well. Don't neglect them. Come to the live classes if you can. Watch the recordings. I mean, for those who aim for 170 plus, and get there, they really end up immersing themselves in this as much as possible. So if you have downtime at work, do you work in the office or remotely?
It's hybrid. So 1 week I'm in, 1 week I'm out.
Okay, cool. So during your commute, you bring your books if you can, or you listen to the podcast if you can. You have your books hidden away at work somewhere, and you have downtime, a break. If you ever do, get it done there. If you have the option to say no to overtime, try to say no to overtime and stick with the LSAT if you can, just for now.
Right. You're right.
And really, of course, and really aim to own the review process, not just to look at the answer key and say, I get it now, or look at an explanation and absorb and just let that carry you. You got to engage actively with this. And that's part of why it can really be exhausting to study thoroughly, because you're articulating your own thought process and figuring out what uniquely led you into a particular trap, for example.
All right. Thank you. This is really helpful.
Yeah, of course. What else would be useful for you to cover, for us to cover together? What questions do you have? Anything you want me to clarify?
The next main question would be, what are some best tips you have for crafting a study plan on our own using the platform? I guess that's something I've been trying to figure out.
Yeah, sure. So given that you have some work to do in all areas, I would actually say that the foundational section of the course provides you with a pretty good rough outline. I wouldn't say you should follow it to the letter, because you've been through this before. You order or basic order in games that you feel pretty good about. For example, it's the multi-level that you need more attention to. So I would say skip the basic, focus on the multi-level. And then don't just stay in the foundational though. Since multi-level gives you trouble, you could watch the brief 3-minute summary in the foundational section of the course, but then go to the relevant section in workshops. In workshops, you can search by, there's a search bar at the top. You can search multi-level, and you'll find all the previous full-length classes we've done on multi-level games. And so each day, watch 1 or 2 of those, complete the related game, review it in depth on your own.
Excellent. Okay, we'll do. Sounds good. Thank you. And then would you say when I'm crafting it, what type of timeline should I do? Should I, do a month long, 2, or should I do all up until I take the exam? Or
well, we'll need to check in and adapt along the way. We can't say now, end of February, early March, what you're going to need in May or in June. And then if you end up deciding to go for August instead of June, that will naturally require adjustments.
Of course.
Generally speaking, as you get into the final month before the exam, it's basically full-length exams, review in depth, but also targeting your weak areas. So if even the month before the exam, you say, you know what, I really want to work on necessary assumption questions, then you can do that. You can carve out 10, 15% of your time to focus exclusively on those. But we can't say yet where you're going to be in May or June or July or August. So for now, I'll say just for the next month, 50% of your time on logic games targeting the specific type. So I'd say based on what we discussed, multi-level, and then games that combine elements of multiple game types. But you can also dig into logical reasoning types that you need and reading comp types that you need. But overall, I'd say for now, based on what you shared, I would do 50, 25, 25 with games as the emphasis.
Excellent. Thank you. My final question is there anything that you think I should be specifically working on to kind of prepare or take best advantage of my next 30-minute coaching call that I have with you in about like 2 weeks or so?
Yeah, sure. I would say between now and then, come with a list of particular question types that give you trouble. That could be anything, of course. And also have an idea of not only question types, but also certain struggles you might face around pacing or endurance or approaches. Those are all fair game.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No, of course. I sense your dedication. I sense your dedication. I sense your diligence. I know that you'll make the most of these calls. I would also say not only with me, but also the live classes. Take full advantage of the live classes. They're happening almost every single day. And so if you see there's logic games class every week, of course. And so if you see that there's a multi-level ordering game or a combination game on the agenda, show up, ask your questions, do the game in advance. And that way you'll be in a better position to ask really targeted specific questions. And you can also ask not only about the game, but also about not only about just how to get it right, but different ways of laying it out or different ways of making inferences and say, okay, well, if you didn't make the inference up front, then how could you approach it? So problematize the different approaches because there's not just one way to do a game.
Right. I know sometimes I'll do a game and, I'll get it done in, let's say, 9 minutes. And then I'll watch the video that said I should have did it in 7 minutes. And it was a completely different approach and a step that I missed that could have shaved off like 90 seconds.
Yeah, there's often little efficiency hacks here and there in terms of reusing previous diagrams,
right? Or
doing more, making more inferences up front, or being deliberate. Not just going by brute force A through E. There's always going to be a better way than that. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. Well, it was great to meet with you. Any questions you need, anything at all, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to help.
Will do. Enjoy your day.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.